Welcome to DCJ's podcast. The Division of Criminal Justice is within the Colorado Department of Public Safety. This podcast is dedicated to sharing the stories, insights, and experiences of those who work tirelessly behind the scenes to improve public safety, policy, support crime victims, and build stronger, more resilient communities. We'll dive into the challenges and triumphs that come with building a safer future for all who call Colorado home. Thank you for tuning in. We're thrilled to have you join. In this episode, we take a look at what happens when first responders, 911 dispatch centers, and behavioral health professionals come together to transform how our state responds to people in crisis. We welcome Erin, Yolanda Alvarez-Montello, policy advisors within DCJ, and Connie Johnson, the Executive Director of Colorado 911 Resource Center. Thank you all for joining us. In recent years, here at DCJ, Erin and her team launched a groundbreaking new effort called the Collaborative Crisis Response Intervention Training, or CRIT. Erin, let's start with you. You've been deeply involved in the development of CRIT for public safety in Colorado. Tell us about this program. What makes it different from first responder training programs?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So the collaborative implementation of CRIT is a new initiative in Colorado funded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The classic CRIT training builds on the Memphis model of crisis intervention training that is pretty widely known across our law enforcement partners. But the CRIT model adds a component related to intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that's a unique component to the CRIT curriculum. Colorado's specific adaptation of CRIT expands the curriculum to bring a greater emphasis to identifying the signs and symptoms of behavioral health crises and challenges associated with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and having professionals practice the skills needed to engage in de-escalation in these situations. Additionally, our modifications are focusing largely on the broader range of the public safety professional continuum and the broader range of first responders, not just focusing on law enforcement.
Wonderful. And why is it so important to bring kind of those two worlds together to tackle some of these challenges?
So the professionals working in public safety answering points, or PSAPs, those folks that work in our 911 centers, are really the first responders that engage with folks in crisis when they call 911. They receive that 911 call, they make important decisions very quickly using limited information. So including this group of professionals in this training allows for that critical information to be collected and passed along to law enforcement, fire, and EMS. What is often interesting is that although these professionals rely on one another to do their jobs every day, they rarely, if ever, train together. And this provides an opportunity for all of our first responders across the continuum to learn and train together in this area of crisis response.
Yeah, and I've always really appreciated our 911 professionals working across the state. It's a very demanding job, and in finding ways to continue to increase the collaboration is so essential in public safety broadly, but specifically when we're talking about these folks that have that initial interaction with the public when they're calling for help. And that collaboration piece, like I said, is pretty essential. We know that it takes a lot of partners to try something new and innovative. So Erin, what role does the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the International Association of Chiefs of Police play in helping Colorado launch this program, and why is that partnership so essential?
So the Bureau of Justice Assistance has provided funding in a number of different areas related to crisis response and crisis response training. They did provide the initial funding that went to the development of CRIT. That was also a partnership with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, or IACP, and some academic partners throughout the country. So they redeveloped that CIT training into CRIT as part of a partnership between those entities. For this particular project, the Bureau of Justice Assistance provided us at DCJ funding to make our proposed modifications to the training to better incorporate our PSAP partners in both the training content and in the scenarios that will be used as part of the skills practice at the end. And so this funding gives us an opportunity to change the training, to make those modifications, as well as to test that through some pilot training opportunities and the creation of a train-the-trainer model for 2 rural and 1 suburban jurisdiction in our state.
Erin, you brought up the scenarios as part of this training. I think scenarios, not just with our PSAP providers, but really public safety professionals across the system, it's so important to have those opportunities to learn in a safe environment before being applied in the real world. Can you talk a little bit more about the scenarios and how those look in this type of a training?
Certainly. So the scenarios are embedded throughout the curriculum. Our goal is to really have that skills training and practice start from day 1 of the training. Additionally, at the very end of the full CRIT course, we will have 1 large training scenario that goes from the initial 911 call all the way through to the on-scene responders' ideal de-escalation of the situation, so that everyone can see what calls look like from start to finish, what information is helpful to gather at each stage, and how each of the first responders involved in the call play their particular role in de-escalating a situation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Erin. And I think that, the train-the-trainer model is something that we utilize a lot at the state level, right? We're trying to impact change across systems for everyone who calls Colorado home. And I think that train-the-trainer model ensures that this program isn't just a one-time workshop that we offer, but that it'll continue to grow in communities across our state. When will agencies start seeing this opportunity where they live?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So yeah, one-time training tends to degrade over time, and this is especially true with skills training, which is the primary emphasis of the CRIT training model. So the BJA funding that we have is allowing us to provide funding to 3 jurisdictions to create training teams that include law enforcement professionals, PSAPs, and subject matter experts in behavioral health or intellectual and developmental disabilities, so that they can then train folks in their local jurisdiction. So we will be launching that competitive process hopefully in the next month. Folks can apply to attend the Train the Trainer. It will be hosted hopefully in a centralized location in the state. The funding that BJA is giving us will provide resources for agencies to backfill their trainers' positions while they are attending training. And then the grant funding will cover the entire cost of the training as well. And then further, the grant funding will help to support those trainers when they go back to their local jurisdictions to provide training to their staff in their agency, their police agency, their PSAP, or regionally, as the case may be, depending on how they're structured and what works best for their situation.
And Erin, you touched on kind of the decay that occurs after someone receives training and the need for that kind of continuous engagement on various topics. Erin, would you be able to talk a little bit about training decay in general and how frequently we see, certain topics in public safety need kind of that refresher and the importance of that?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but it's fairly common with any skill that requires practice, to need to have continuous practice. I think we see in the law enforcement training that's supported by POST that there's a lot of refresher courses that are required. I think Connie can probably talk more specifically about the refresher training required for PSAPs, and the same is for EMS, right? Regular continuing education, regular retraining, regular testing of those skills is critical to maintain the consistency in the application of those skills. So creating this model where we have on-site local trainers who can provide not just the initial training, but also booster trainings using some of the same curriculum. It can be separated out into modules for boosters as well. I think really benefits local agencies, and then they're not having to come back to state partners every time they need a refresher or practice. And they can run the scenarios over and over again with a few modifications to really help sharpen those skills over time.
Oh, wonderful. And that's a great segue here. I'll bring in Connie to the conversation. Connie, can you tell us a little bit more about Colorado 911 resources and your role with the agency?
Well, the Resource Center is a nonprofit organization that what we provide for the PSAPs around the state is information about training, technology, any legislation, anything that has to do with how they're operating. And we have 83 PSAPs in Colorado, and they range from a one person on duty to several people on duty. One person is answering 911, dispatching the calls, doing everything. And in a larger center, they have call takers. So it's a varied example of how they operate in Colorado.
Yeah, thanks. And as you noted, you work closely with these PSAP professionals, the 911 dispatchers who answer those first calls for help. For listeners who might not be familiar, can you walk us through what happens behind the scenes when someone dials 911?
When someone dials 911 or even an admin line, an emergency call can come in on either one of the lines. 911 is just the easiest reference. You don't know when you're answering that call what you're going to get. If you're going to get, someone screaming at you or someone very low key talking to you, but you're set up to react. You want to know where their emergency is and what their emergency is, so that you can send the proper resources to them. And you do that in a very quick and efficient manner.
And you mentioned that PSAP professionals are often that first voice that someone hears when they are in crisis. And that can certainly be high stakes and a very emotional moment. What kind of challenges do PSAPs face in recognizing behavioral health crises and relaying that information effectively to our first responders on scene?
You have to rely on what the caller is giving you. You have to relay that information quickly to the responders. And sometimes, someone can be very, very screaming at you and you're trying to calm them down so you can get the right information. And then there's other times when there's almost no affectation in their voice at all, and you're still trying to get that kind of information. Where are you? What's going on? Or it might not be the person in crisis. If we're dealing just with behavioral health type of calls, it might be a family member. It might be someone who doesn't know the person, is observing some behavior that's concerning to them, that says, okay, this person's having a crisis right now. And it's up to the dispatcher to determine who am I going to send.
Yeah, and I've often been struck that, this isn't about a set book of procedures, right? There's no script for every call that comes in to a 911 center across Colorado. It's really about empathy, digging into what's really going on with a particular incident, and us being able to equip our responders around the state to understand the human side of each call. Before CRIT, PSAPs and law enforcement rarely train together. How do you think joint training could shift the culture of emergency response here in Colorado?
I think it's very important. You tend to just be a voice. 911 dispatchers are just a voice, and our responders are just a voice to us. And you have that opportunity to train together, to hear other people's experiences and stories and relate to each other and maybe see something from a different point of view. You have, when dispatchers, they get the opportunity in some centers to go on what we call ride-alongs, to ride along with the fire department or the law enforcement or EMS. And the same is true, sometimes they let those responders come into the dispatch center and do what we call a sit-along. But that's a different thing than actually going through the training and doing the scenarios together and seeing, oh, wait a minute, let's talk about that. Could we do that better? Can we communicate this better to you? So looking forward to it.
I love that. And, that shared understanding could truly change outcomes, making sure every call gets the right response, not just the fastest one. And I have a little bit of experience with this and in creating alternative response programs at the local level. So it's something I'm very passionate about. What's been the response from the PSAP community so far? Are dispatchers open to this kind of integrated training? What's their experience been like?
Well, I'm not going to speak for every one of them out there. There's a lot of them, but the majority are very excited about it and the opportunity to be able to share training and share experiences.
Well, Connie, thank you so much for your insight and your expertise. We really appreciate it. And now I'm going to shift over to Yolanda, our policy advisor. Yolanda, your work centers on using data to guide decisions. How does research inform the design and evaluation of a program like CRIT?
Thank you for the question, Director Lunn. And yes, you are correct. When creating the CRIT training, we included Colorado-specific data, latest population statistics, and Colorado resources to ensure this CRIT training is truly homegrown and made for Colorado public safety professionals. With this in mind, our goal is to also use feedback from this round of participants on the usefulness of the training and the impacts they are seeing in the field in real time in their communities or in their agencies as a result of training their teams. We'll also be using surveys, informal interviews, and observations of the training to assess the early impact of the train-the-trainer model on the modified curriculum and on the de-escalation skills learned in the training. All of this collected information will ultimately help us improve collaboration and outcomes.
So what you're saying is we're not just training people, we're tracking outcomes to better understand what works. From your perspective, Yolanda, what does success look like?
Yeah, so long-term goals for Colorado Public Safety CRIT are really focused on improved communications between PSAPs and officers, equip our public safety professionals with crisis de-escalation tools, and reduce escalation incidences. We also hope to increase the use of behavioral health and community-based resources for individuals in crisis. During this pilot phase, we will be looking for feedback and input from the sites on improvements to the modified CRIT training modules and the scenarios. This will not only help us develop more formal evaluation in the future, but also ensure the training curriculum continues to grow and improve over time.
And when we talk about sustainability, the train-the-trainer model is key. How do you ensure that once the pilot ends, the learning continues?
Excellent question. Creating train-the-trainer opportunities are crucial for ensuring sustainability. These trained trainers become local experts, which allows for training to meet the needs of the jurisdiction. Additionally, the train-the-trainer model will ideally create opportunities for regional training in our rural communities, thus helping alleviate the need for lengthy travel and significant time offline for our first responders, and time away from clients for behavioral health providers on the training teams.
And can I add something? You said something, Matt, about questions and I wanted to make sure that it's understood about most 911 centers, PSAPs, have some sort of protocol cards or a protocol.
They do, yeah.
That they go through, and that's understood about. We do have it depends on who you got your cards from or who you got your information from, your script. But there are scripts available for the dispatchers for mental health issues. Just say that almost all of the dispatch centers, if not all of them in Colorado, operate with protocol for how dispatchers will handle certain situations, particularly with behavioral health, known as emergency medical dispatch. And those calls give a dispatcher a script, a place to start when they're asking the questions to determine what's going on with the caller or what they're seeing. And the other thing I wanted to tack on with what Erin said about following up, dispatch centers, most of them have what's called a quality assurance, quality improvement. And that this will give another layer to this type of training for dispatchers to get that kind of feedback.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate the
I
clarification.
really appreciate you guys doing this.
Well, I know I appreciate the three of you very much. But I appreciate the work that the three of you are doing in this space. I think it's really important. I think, and we didn't really touch on it on this particular call, but I think the resources that we're starting to provide towards our PSAP providers, especially around mental health and their own support and well-being, I think is so essential. And I hope that we continue to have that focus moving forward. It's so encouraging to see DCJ combining policy, research, and on-the-ground training to build long-term solutions. Before we close, I'd like to ask each of you to reflect for a moment. When you think about the impact CRIT could have, not just on agencies, but on the people behind those emergency calls, what gives you hope? I'll start with Erin.
Thanks, Matt. I'm always hopeful when I see the collaboration between federal, state, local, and community partners. And I think this partnership through this project and this work is a great example of how this collaboration can benefit the most vulnerable members of our community.
Wonderful. And Yolanda?
What gives me hope is that these trainings exist and have been both embraced and impactful for numerous communities across the country. As a public safety force, there is recognition that these skills are crucial to be both a guardian and protector of our communities. My hope comes from widening perspectives and better serving all who call Colorado home.
Wonderful. And Connie, what gives you hope?
Information is so important, and sharing that information and the training. And I really look forward to it's more awareness on behavioral health calls that that the dispatchers and the law enforcement are able to communicate with each other and ask those questions in an environment that's not heated from a call, but in a training environment, to hear your reasoning, to hear from the officers, oh, that would be why you would react that way, and to hear from the dispatchers, now I understand why you gave me that information. That's what I'm hopeful for, that communication.
Wonderful. Well, I want to say thank you to Erin, Yolanda, and Connie for your leadership and for helping our listeners understand how innovation begins with collaboration. Thank you for listening. We are just getting started, and we look forward to bringing you more stories, interviews, and discussions that highlight the incredible work being done in our communities to build a stronger, safer Colorado. If you enjoyed today's episode, help us increase awareness by sharing and subscribing to this podcast. Together, we can continue to drive change and create a brighter future for everyone. Until next time, stay safe and stay engaged.